I'd like to talk to you about the 2050 city, a vision that drives us. Cities and citizens around the world are at the beginning of something that we have no clue about. In fact, today is the day where you and I are about to vision something that we've never really done before. And what is that? Our cities, from wherever we're from, are about to begin a challenge to become global cities. So what does that mean? So we talk about the vision of cities, we're also talking about the vision of what we want in our cities. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. If you have a Twitter account, I'd like you to tweet me on @2050city. I've got 2 questions for you, so I will not take any offense if you take your phones out right now and get ready to tweet me on 140 characters. I know it's a little bit limited, but you're going to have to get creative. So, question number 1. If you had the chance to design your own city, a vision, what would that vision look like? Number 2, looking back from the year 2050, what was your role in making that vision come true? Good stuff. Le Corbusier mentioned that the expression of the people at the time is the spirit of the epoch. He questioned the need for protective walls in the time of explosives. Today, we question the need of electricity consumption in the time of global warming. A city is a basis of a plethora of disciplines and dimensions. It's an integrated system. A city is a place where you and I can find amenities available to us, and the manner in which these amenities are available is what makes a city successful. And so, a city is designed in order for us to feel comfortable. A city, however, is not just the urban form. Guess what it is? It's a metabolic system. And that metabolic system allows for the city to grow, just like a human body. So if it's a metabolic system, it needs food, it needs fuel, and it needs many other raw materials in order for it to survive, just like a human body. However, is there a stage where the city grows beyond its means? Just like cities like Tokyo or Mexico City that have populations the size of countries. In 2008, my business partner, who's now my business partner, but back then he wasn't, he and I met Bill Gates, and after a lovely meeting with Bill Gates, we sat down, we're having a cup of tea, and he said, "Would you like to start a business with me?" I think I laughed my head off, because neither did I have an idea in my mind, and definitely didn't have a business plan of how we could make it happen. I thought about it a little, and then I was invited by the President of India, Mrs. Pratibha Patil, to go from the north to the south of India. And it was a trip for the Indian diaspora to move around the country and be introduced to many other disciplines like the government or sports or economic industries to understand where India is going. And it was through that trip that we had ample time to think, but actually it made me realize what role we have, ourselves, what role we have in the generation that we are, that is unique in making these differences come true. And it was in that trip to India, look at the number of cities that India will need over the next 50 years, is it? That we play a role in that. And if we play a role in that, what will that do to what we vision and how we vision that will come true? It was in 2009, February, lo and behold, the business did come true. So Rod Hackney and myself joined forces, and our first job was in Saudi Arabia. Can you imagine? Single woman, under the age of 40, in Saudi Arabia for the very first time. It was our first project. It was crazy. It was fun. And we were invited by the Saudi American Bank to help design their headquarters. We were to appoint an architectural practice, one of the top three, actually, one from America, one from Australia, one from the UK. And we interviewed all of them. We wrote the brief, we interviewed them. And in one of the interviews in London, with the Norman Foster's architectural practice called Foster and Partners, when we walked through the reception area, on the left-hand side there was this fantastic poster, and it was a desert with a city in the middle of it. And I asked, David Nelson, what's this? He said, oh, don't you know? This is Masdar City. I thought, Masdar City? Masdar City, zero carbon, zero waste city. I thought, what? Hold on a second. You're trying to create something in Abu Dhabi which has unmentionable temperatures in the summer. You're going to create a sustainable city in the desert, and you and I are both aware nothing grows in the desert. So how are you going to sustain anybody in the desert? Well, that's the challenge. And 4 hours of a conversation with David Nelson later, he described the aims and the processes and the practices of Masdar City. He started off by saying this was a concept, it was a vision, and it was a vision by Norman Foster, just as Nikki mentioned earlier, that he would make it come true. Now, I met Norman Foster shortly after, and I asked him, so tell me about Masdar City, about your vision. And you know what? He really believed that he could make it happen. And what surprised me slightly was that the pitfall for a lot of cities, especially in the Gulf region, is that occupants like you and I, we want to be thermally comfortable. What does that mean? We want to be comfortable in an environment. There is a whole range of temperatures and humidity and lux and everything that you fall into to make you comfortable in a building. Now, with Abu Dhabi and the seasonal variations, during the summer you can go as hot, I'm not going to mention it, but you can go very hot. And then in the winter, you can sort of bring it milder. During those variations of temperature, you and I are maintaining our well-being. And in order for that well-being to be maintained, we need what? We need cooling, right? We need heating in some parts of the world. Now, if you want to be cooled, that costs money with regards to fossil fuels. So in a desert environment, you're creating effectively a city that can survive without all of the typical fossil fuels in order for it to be zero carbon, zero waste. What has led a lot of this research is an understanding that when people survive, what they're doing effectively is going back to basics. I'm going to give you an example of a city in Syria, Aleppo, which started off with 1,000 years of continuous inhabitation. Can you give me an example of a city that has survived over 1,000 years? Well, Aleppo has. Aleppo in 1980s was being threatened by the local environment where people were explaining that we need to take down the center of the city, which is from the 12th century. It has a tell, like a mountain that you can see just over there on the right. And this tell was going to be destroyed, and a new city centre with new urban transport links was going to be created. When I met Adli Qudsi, someone who's the hero of Aleppo and helping it to survive, he fought and said, I don't want this city to be destroyed. I was born here. And then he went to the States and got his architecture degree, came back to Aleppo and saw that it was being destroyed. So he suggested that they retain this place and that it become a World Heritage Site. Lo and behold, it did become a World Heritage Site in 1984. It survived, but what it showed us is that cities are vulnerable. Cities are subjected to destruction as well as wars. And if you come back to history, you'll find that Aleppo itself, after the First World War, because of the demise of the Ottoman Empire, after the Treaty of Versailles, what they realized was that because it became part of British and French territory, that from having been one of the stops of the major trade routes for thousands of years, it had now stopped. And it no longer had the access that it did through what is present-day Lebanon into the Mediterranean Sea. So, cities can rise and they can fall. At the moment, as you all know, because of the Syrian conflicts, it has come to an end. It is destroyed. But I have full belief that this city, Aleppo, will rise again one day, just like other cities. Cities live and they die, but ultimately they will survive if they can learn to adapt. Masdar City, it's the reason why I started my PhD at UCL in London, at the Bartlett School. I came across this vision and thought, wow, so you can create a city in the middle of the desert with zero carbon, zero waste? I'd love to understand what it means to create a sustainable lifestyle. If you are able to design the way that people are living, surely that's something of a behaviour that we'd love to learn about. So I went to university to research this, and I've just finished. But what it taught me is that we're in a race. And that race is so competitive that you and I, every human being, is part of it. But we just don't know it yet. Masdar City, some say that it has failed to meet its expectations. But I say that it's a pioneer. The reason for that is that if you look through the eyes of the people who value its visions, the people are the ones that will take it forward. A city that evolves is a city that survives. A city that can go through the experimentation, the innovation, and ultimately become an integrated process, allowing the occupants to be part of it, is what succeeds. There's a great exhibition at the Crystal in London, if you visit anytime soon. It's designed by Siemens, and it's brought all these international technologies in order for it to teach the people who walk through it more about I'd say, the challenges of cities today. And one of the things that I picked out from the Siemens exhibition was that the UK spends only 3% of its health budget on prevention. 3% of its budget on health, in total, on health, on just the prevention of it. In other words, 97% of its budget goes towards what? Dealing with what's rest of the health that is destroyed. But imagine if they turned that around. And imagine if they turned it around in a way that cities were spending money on preventing bad health, that they were spending money on preventing bad atmosphere, bad food, bad transport. And what would they spend that money on? On creating a long-term vision of what we, the inhabitants, would need to survive, that the endless opportunities that are there. Cities are, for time immemorial, the basis of development. Cities have become in many ways, the source of the country's prestige, a country's economy. But spiritually, do they have a role in the way that we live? If we look back in history, we can see many examples. And a lot of these examples of sustainable, successful cities have come in the form of reports. You can have a look at the McKinsey report that came out recently, or from some of my colleagues at the Bartlett School, or LSE Cities, or MIT Sensible City Laboratory, Cisco, Intel. Everyone's writing about cities. And I see time and time again that there are some factors, like a pattern, that keep on coming up. And this pattern comes in three forms. The first part of that pattern is fearless leadership. The second part of that pattern is ownership, where the inhabitants, you and I, play a role in the way that that city is designed. And the third part of that pattern is, guess what? An incentive. An incentive that allows you a new behavior to thrive. Empowering people to move towards a sustainable lifestyle according to the scarcity of resources is what we're looking at. Cities That Live and Die Over Time by Lewis Mumford are cities that have learned to adapt over time. They're cities that have learned to create an integrated mechanism, just like a metabolic system. If you look at many cities around the world, they have, just like a human body, a heart. But if and when the heart dies, if the heart stops, the human body dies, right? Well, what happens to a city? If the heart of a city dies and it can no longer sustain the extreme urban sprawl of the city, where did these resources come from, do you think? From faraway lands, geographic regions, all of the resources come in because guess what? The city is metabolizing all these resources. And the larger it grows, the more people it invites, the higher the population, the higher the infrastructure costs. And guess what? The higher the cost for retaining it, for it to evolve and to keep on growing. Now, if the city is growing and it also needs a heart, then surely the people who are living there become part of that heart. The city thrives because of the people that live there. So when you look at cities, when you look at products, you look at the fact that cities are actually smarter than products. Cities evolve, but they're not a product because unlike consumers, so you and I are consumers of cities, when we consume a product, we've used it, we've let it go. But a city doesn't do that. A city evolves. It keeps on providing for its consumers. It keeps on adapting for its consumers. So, ultimately, if we put sensors around the whole city, collect all the data that we need to know where that measurement is going. We could put sensors everywhere you want. But ultimately, it's about where we're going. How many people have left this city for another city? Numerous. How many people have experienced what it means to live in multiple cities? The bottom case is that we need a vision. There's a race to try and create a joint vision because it doesn't come from one person. It's a joint goal. And if we want that, we have to work together. I'll be looking forward to your tweets. Thank you.
Just to get this right, you met Bill Gates and he said, would you like to do business with me? And you returned, let me think about it. When Tia started to talk, she said, tweet answers to the 2 questions that I gave you. So who have you tweeted?
Did anyone tweet me? One person did.
Okay, here's an offer. You ask the questions again, you guys tweet, and you get 10% discount for next year's TEDxKlagenfurt. So maybe you want to ask the questions once more?
Are you guys ready? Ready for the 10% discount for next year? I bet you are. Okay, question number 1. If there was a vision that you had for a future city, what would it look like? And question number 2, if from the year 2050, you look back, what was the role that you played to make that vision come true?
Thank you.